On behalf of UCLA Public Lectures, Campus Events, and the Department of Astronomy, I'd like to welcome you to an evening with James Randi. Mr. Randi will be available after the lecture demonstration to sign books and other objects that you might like him to sign. I'd now like to introduce Ed Krupp, the director of Griffith Observatory.
I'd asked James Randi to try and materialize me on the stage without going behind that contraption, but it wasn't successful. Thank you very much for the privilege of being here and introducing James Randi. In a sense, I wouldn't normally have the chance to do this because of the circumstances under which James Randi was invited here and how this program that we're fortunate to have this evening was arranged. Originally, Dr. George A. Bell, who died last October and was a professor in the astronomy department here at UCLA, arranged for this program and set it up. And this was done out of Dr. A. Bell's commitment to open minds but hard noses in trying to deal with the phenomena that surround us. George A. Bell, of course, was a scientist, and I was privileged to study under him at UCLA. But he was a very demanding individual as well, in the sense that while he could be very entertaining, very humorous, he also really wanted good, clear thought, and he wanted, of course, very honest thought. And so he had a concern as well about science and how we use it, and about pseudoscience and how it uses us. He had a concern about the kinds of fun people have at our expense, and tried at times to provide a little fun at the expense of those. So James Randi, here then, by George A. Bell's commitment to good, clear, solid thinking and his belief in the value of science for all of our benefit. James Randi is, of course, the amazing Randi, one of the world's great magicians, and also an investigator of paranormal claims for the last 35 years. In this connection, he is also a founding member of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, and has authored a couple of books as well, one of which you can find out there at the table, selling very rapidly, I might add. That one being Flim Flam, which tells the truth about a variety of things, including unicorns, despite a number of photographic documentaries on unicorns that can be found in other book locations, even close to this one. And, of course, is also the author of The Magic of Uri Geller. He's a contributor to the volume of Science and the Paranormal that George A. Bell co-edited, and he also provided a recent report in the Skeptical Inquirer, which is the publication of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. He had a recent report in there about Project Alpha, a rather intriguing story of the introduction of two young conjurers posing as psychics into the McDonnell Laboratory for Psychical Research at Washington University. Tonight, James Randi is going to be talking about science and the chimera, pursuit of the paranormal. I would normally say, here's James Randi, but please let me say, and now, the amazing Randi.
Ed Krupp is himself a character and a half. If I can figure out how to work this thing, there we go. I knew I could do it. I think that some people in science, as was the case with George A. Bell, have a certain flair and should do much more of their activity in front of the public because they have that ability to communicate with people. I'm an entertainer at heart and certainly by profession, a conjurer. And as a magician, if you will, or conjurer, I walk out in front of my audiences and greet them thusly. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Randi, and I'm a magician. That is to say, I'm a liar, a cheat, a charlatan, and a thief. But I do it all with a certain amount of class, a certain amount of panache, which commands your respect, if not your outright admiration. Now, that statement is meant to make the folks giggle, as you did, and it sort of sets them up for what they're about to see. For I am an entertainer. Any magician is an entertainer. If you were to see Mr. Hal Holbrook, the eminent actor, come out on this stage or any other stage, as I have seen him several times, and you may have seen him on television or in person, doing his Evening with Mark Twain, I know that you would be hugely entertained. It is a remarkable impersonation, an impression, if you will, of Mark Twain. Mr. Hal Holbrook dresses, looks, talks, and acts exactly like Mark Twain. He asks only one thing of you, as does any actor, as does any magician. For a magician is, basically, an actor playing the part of a sorcerer. He asks you to suspend your disbelief and go along with him on this little fantasy trip. Pretend for an hour or two that he is Mark Twain. Now, if he were to ask you to believe that he is Mark Twain in actuality, he would certainly insult your intelligence. But your intelligence doesn't seem to be the least bit insulted when you're asked to believe that Jean Dixon can predict the future, in spite of her abysmal record at doing so, or that certain people can bend spoons merely by looking at them or caressing them very gently with their fingertips, or that columns in the paper will tell you how to behave today and if you should invest in, I'm not talking about the stockbrokers, that's almost the same story, but I'm talking about the astrologers. You're not insulted when that kind of claim is made to you, and I think you should be, because you're being put on, folks. Now, Ed Krupp did happen to mention it. It's not normally a part of my address to an audience like this, but he mentioned that my book, this second last one, is titled The Truth About Unicorns, Parapsychology, and Other Delusions. And I might add that since you have seen documentaries on unicorns, you might be interested to know where the original process came from. You've seen some Angora goats with little horns in the middle of their foreheads. Cute little devils, I agree, but not unicorns. Close enough for government work, maybe, but not unicorns. Plato actually had the original manuscript on that. Would you believe that? It's an obscure manuscript by Plato on animal husbandry. It's a very simple thing. You, according to his description, I've never tried it, but you may want to go home and grab a billy goat and try it. A newborn billy goat has a couple of little nodules underneath the skin on its head that are going to develop into horns, but they're not really in place yet. So what you do is you make a small incision, ouch, on both sides, remove these little buds, split them, place them together, bind them together, make an incision in the middle, slip it in there, tape it in place, voila. After a few weeks, that firmly attaches itself by cartilage in there, and it's a horn, a single horn, which instead of going this way or that way, goes straight out because it's trying desperately to go in both directions and can't. So you have a unicorn. Not the best unicorn, but the best you can come up with. I beg your pardon. Stop that child from playing with the rattle, please. Now, I have just come back from England. I was in jolly old for a very specific purpose. I carried with me not only my check for $10,000, which is in this case that I have at my fingers, and I know your names, but also a check for $100,000, which was put into my care by a gentleman named Dick Smith, an Australian millionaire, who is of a like mind, and he asked me to go to England to investigate a dowser. Now, ladies and gentlemen, dowsing, or water divining, or divining in general, if you will, is the claimed art of people with a fork stick or a pendulum or with pieces of wire or whatever, sometimes merely by using only their hands, to determine where flowing water or electricity or gold or whatever you will, oil in many cases, particularly recently, many people have been claiming to find oil that way, is located. Now, it's a rather mysterious thing in that it sort of, it doesn't quite match the rest of the things that I've investigated over the many decades that I've been doing this sort of work. When Dick Smith sent me to England to investigate this dowser, he first sent me a videotape. Something I saw in the videotape made me highly suspicious, to say the least. So I called Dick and I said, yes, we'd better look into this, and I told him what my suspicions were. Turned out that the gentleman had made himself a small electronic box with a meter on it. And there was a flip-flop circuit in there, a random generator. What it was really doing was turning the circuit on, then turning it off several times a second. And when the meter was connected in, the meter was waving back and forth like this. At one point, you would press a switch which would lock it in either the on or off position. And if you did it just at any old time, chances were that you'd get it in one or the other, but you really couldn't control which one it would be in. So there were wires coming out the front and a simple 500 ohm resistor, and he had a student of dowsing who, with a little pendulum, would approach the box and wave his pendulum back and forth and announce whether or not the circuit was on or off. Now, naturally, we could develop a very expensive and very complicated, sophisticated piece of electronic gadgetry which would determine whether or not a few milliamps of current were flowing in that resistor. But this gentleman was doing it, he said, merely by waving the pendulum around. Well, as I said, I detected something, well, two very suspicious things in the videotape. And when I went over to England, I was prepared to see whether or not I was right. But I did not go with the attitude that I've often been accused of. I didn't go saying, I'm going to debunk this man, I'm going to find out what the trick is. I had seen something suspicious, but I had no positive proof until I actually got there and saw the process at work. Had no positive proof that it was a trick. But when I got there, after he had done it 3 times and been successful 3 times in a row, I knew exactly what the trick was, and on a pad of paper, with witnesses watching over my shoulder, shortly before he announced whether it was off or on, I wrote down whether it was off or on. The people over my shoulder were amazed that I could do this well. I had just, still suffering from jet lag. I was all that good at it. Well, I sat down at the table immediately after he had done it 10 times, and I did it 10 times in a row successfully myself, much to his discomfort. Now, it wouldn't have been to his discomfort if he'd really believed in dowsing. He would have thought that, well, this man has the power too. But I noted that if you looked at the needle would quiver ever so slightly when the circuit was on, and it wouldn't quiver at all when it was off. There was a little problem with shorting out the meter. It didn't seem to quite short out. Perhaps it was an error in the circuitry, if I want to be generous. Well, the man did not collect the $110,000 that I was offering. But frankly, this is the first and only dowser that I ever found cheating. Is there anyone in our audience tonight who is adept at the art of dowsing by any chance? There might be someone here who is adept at it. If so, we might have the possibility of doing an interesting demonstration. No adepts at dowsing? Not a one? Kel pity. Well, if we had one, I was going to ask that person up on the stage because before the performance this afternoon, as a matter of fact, I had the electrician climb underneath and discover that it's not only very dusty underneath there, but it's loaded with chairs, and he finally found the cable that leads into the main lighting system, and we plotted it on the stage there. I was going to ask if the dowser, using the dowsing rods that I made earlier, would be able to find that conduit. Now, the dowsing rods that I refer to are the kind most commonly used. These are prepared at very little expense from 2 coat hangers. Our budget is not as huge as you might imagine. These are dowsing rods, aside from the forked stick, which is a somewhat different technique. They are used in this fashion. The dowser holds them loosely in the hand so that they can rotate back and forth very easily, holds them out parallel in front of his body like this. Now, when that person passes over some wiring with a considerable amount of electricity passing through it, they are supposed to cross like that, and in some cases even diverge like that. You notice that I didn't move in order to make that happen because we have here a system which is in very poor equilibrium. It is really quite difficult and requires a lot of feedback in my hands to keep them parallel like that. The tiniest inclination of my hand, now I'm going to make them converge, and you didn't see any inclination of my hands whatsoever. I'll now make them come apart, and you will similarly see no movement of my hands. And yet, that movement of the hands is very, very slight, the tiniest bit of a deviation from flat out, and they will converge or diverge. Well, how does dowsing work then? The answer is very simple. It doesn't work. It does not work simply because it is what's known as an idiomotor reaction. That's why I'm able to say that dowsers are honest folks, with the exception of this one gentleman that I discovered in England. All of the other dowsers, and there have been, I imagine, over 100 of them now that I've come upon and to whom I've offered my $10,000 check, have all fallen on their noses when subjected to a double-blind test. Now, I won't spend a great deal of time indicating to you what scientific experimentation is really all about and how to design an experiment. That's what I came to UCLA for, and I've been doing that with the academic groups here and with several classes and special interest groups. I will say, however, that when you do a test, it must always be done double-blind, which means that the person examining the results of the test does not know what the results are supposed to be. One has a tendency to find what one looks for. Now, in doing a dowsing test, if you know what the result is supposed to be, that is, if you have a pipe flowing in front of you with water flowing in it, and you pass over the pipe, it is really an astonishing thing that almost anyone handling those dowsing rods and or with the pendulum or with the fork stick, which is another system out of equilibrium, will find that that mechanism reacts very strongly, or appears to. But what's actually happening is unconsciously the person is giving a slight impetus to it, a slight change in angle, in such a way that it drives the mechanism in the direction of the sought result. Now, this can be easily proven. When I was in Australia, you have to say Australia if you're in Australia, we tested a number of dowsers. We did over 511 tests in one day. Their expectation of being successful was in all cases, whether they were trying for gold or oil or water or whatever it was that we'd set up for them, was exactly 10%, or 1 in 10. 10% expectation by chance alone. At the end of the day, when we summed up the results, they'd gotten very slightly less than 11%. Right on the nose, so to speak. In 511 tests, that's considered to be pretty good. They had claimed that they would get at least 80%. Most of them said they would get 100%. One gentleman in particular was quite an object lesson, and we have him on videotape making these statements, rather astonishing. He arrived practically in rags, and yet he said he was a gold dowser who found nothing but gold and never failed. That was hard to understand unless the price of gold in his area had really dropped. He said he could find the gold in one's teeth, and that he was so sensitive to gold that we had to stand well back. If we had any gold fillings, that rod would bend and turn like crazy and maybe wrap us in the head for all we knew. Well, we gave the man a pretty fair chance. We set up 10 cardboard boxes, all identical. We had a brick, an ordinary paving brick, in each one of them. We had him douse the ground underneath to make sure there was no vast underground river flowing, or no big lump of gold or a meteorite or anything under the ground that would distract him. He assured us there wasn't. And then we took a $22,000 ingot of gold, a piece of gold about that big and about that thick. You wanted to rub it all over your body. It felt good. It even smelled good. And I don't know whether gold smells, but I could smell it, I swear. And we had 2 bank guards with large black pistols also standing by, so I wasn't about to do anything tricky. We then had a randomization process by choosing a counter out of a bag and mixing the bag and whatnot in 2 teams, one of whom would place the gold in one of the boxes and a number selected at random. They'd all be in a row sitting out there on the ground. That team would retire. The next team, including myself, would come out and watch the man go back and forth with the dowsing stick. He was required to do 10 tests, 10 times with 10 boxes. And he did 5 and wanted to quit. We asked him why. He said, well, I know I've been successful, but we had not been telling him each time whether he was successful. In fact, that team didn't know whether he was successful or not. He would announce it was number 7. It might have been number 3, but if he said number 7, we wrote it down on our list, and we retired. The next team came back and moved it around according to the random number system we developed. And he'd come back and do the test again. He wanted to quit after 5 because he felt that we wouldn't give him the complete $10,000. In this case, it was, $120,000 because it had been increased by local donations. Their money was never safer. I assured them of that, and they were pretty well assured too. $120,000 he figured we wouldn't give him, so he figured that he'd settle for half of it. Well, he didn't know how successful he'd been, but he swore he'd been 100% successful because the power was very strong, very strong. The more gold, the more bending of the stick, it seems. Well, we made him go through the whole 10. At the end of the day, we announced to everyone what the results were. He had gotten 0 out of 10. Much to his surprise and his chagrin. He went around shaking his head and wondering what could possibly be wrong. See, in none of the tests before had he ever done a double-blind test in which he didn't know which box it was supposed to be in, nor did anyone else from whom he could pick up some sort of a clue. Well, I decided that I would give him a definitive lesson, and this is important to remember. I took the ingot of gold and I placed it, I recall, in box number 3, closed the box and put it down on the ground. I said, show us that your dowsing stick works. Well, the dowsing stick is a Y-shaped piece of stick like this, piece of green twig, something very flexible. He held it like this and he approached the box, and the stick was going out of control. And it twisted around and it slammed down in the box, and he said, boy, "That's a big piece of gold." I said, "It sure is." And I moved it to another position. He went over to it, fought it like crazy. Finally, down came the stick. We did that 3 times in a row. Then finally I said, "You move it this time." He went over to the box, picked it up, and it came right up in his hand like this. There was no brick and no piece of gold in it. He had been finding an empty box. But then he laid it on the ground and he said, "Wait a moment now, just a minute. Took his dowsing stick and went for the box, and it stayed perfectly level. And he broke out in a smile and said, "See?" Well, my question to him was, "Yes, I see. Do you see?" I think the answer probably would have been no. To this day, he still swears that he was 100% successful. But I said, "You just lost 10 times. Well, 11 times if you want to count the last one." He said, "Oh, no, that's when the power wasn't working." This is very much like going to the racetrack, betting your money, and if your horse loses, they give you back your money so you can try again. That doesn't work at the racetrack, and it doesn't work in a scientific experiment either. Now, I found that dowsers, as I say, are very honest folks. We asked all of those folks at the end of the day, "Do you still believe in the power of dowsing and that you can do it?" How many? And they all shut up their hand, with the exception of one man who put his hand halfway out. He says, "I'm not too sure now." And Dick Smith turned to me and says, "Well, we got 1 out of the 11 that's not sure." I said, "Give him a chance." Half an hour later, after sandwiches and a couple of cans of beer, he turned to me and he says, "Wait a minute." He says, "I'm going to vote 100% on that because I know what it was. It was those walkie-talkies you were using." I said, "Yeah, that's probably the reason. That must be it." But the next day, they had an even better one. Someone checked up and found out there were some sunspots that day. And you know, folks, that'll do it every time. Sunspots, absolutely deadly. What didn't occur to them is that Jupiter was in Sagittarius, too, which also is a terrible sign. You wouldn't want that to happen to your worst enemy. Well, as you know, I have been investigating this kind of thing for decades all around the world and offering my money, going about waving this check. Incidentally, that check waving business started almost 20 years ago this March, when on a radio program in New York, a parapsychologist accused me of not being a man of my word. He said, "Why don't you put your money where your mouth is?" So I immediately made this rash offer. I said, $10,000 to any person or persons who can provide positive evidence under good observing conditions of any supernatural, occult, or paranormal power. And he raised his eyebrows and said, "Well, you're going to lose your money." That was 19 years ago. Haven't lost it yet. 600 people have applied. 75 have actually been tested in formal scientific tests, and all of them have fallen on their noses. Now, what I was immediately accused of doing, and they're still ranting and raving about it by the parapsychologist, is he's offering $10,000. What a cheap theatrical stunt. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. There's no way you can get around these people. If I withdrew the offer, they'd say, "Ha ha, now he's afraid." And if I doubled it, they'd say, desperation, trying to get publicity with it. What the heck can you do with these folks? I really don't know. Okay, a lot of people may not want the $10,000. And most of them turn me down. They say, "No, I'm not going to tie for the $10,000. I'll just have you test me." How noble. They always fall on their nose anyway. But they do that for, I think, a very good reason. One of 2 possible reasons. Maybe they are really noble characters and don't want the $10,000. I did a test with a Lynn Gladhill, a professed astrologer, not long ago. Her chances of success were 1 in 5. She said she'd get 5 in 5. She got 1 in 5. She said, "That's not bad." I said, "Not too good either, Lynn." She said, "Well, of course, you had negative vibrations and you were skeptical. And as we know, it's like Jupiter in Sagittarius. That'll throw it off completely." Incidentally, speaking of that, I do not believe in astrology. I do not, because I'm a Leo and we're very hard to convince of things like that. Perhaps my greatest claim to fame or infamy, as some would have it, is my opposition to the handsome young Israeli fashion model named Uri Geller, who came over from Israel many years ago and managed to confound completely the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California, who are still burning from that and have welts to show for it. They are claiming now that his work was only 3% of their total parapsychological work. I don't know if the other 97% is any better, because we haven't been allowed to see that. That's all hush-hush stuff, except for telepathy between submarines and a few dumb things like that. But don't laugh, you're paying for it. The Pentagon, a couple of years ago, they won my Uri Award. I give an Uri Award every year. It's a bent spoon mounted in a clear plastic base that anyone can see through, if you follow my meaning. It's a little wobbly. It's loose in the base, which is sort of congruent with the subject at hand. And this spoon is given in 4 categories each and every year. A couple of years ago, the Pentagon won it. Our Pentagon, ladies and gentlemen, bless them. They spent $6 million of your tax money and mine on 2 projects. One was Project Vampire. That was done in conjunction with the U.S. Air Force. They wanted to find out whether or not by burning, I hope you're ready for this, I really hope you're ready for this, by burning a high-resolution photograph of a Russian missile or satellite, they could cause that object to disintegrate. Need I add that the money was not well spent. The experiment failed. The second part of the experiment was to find out whether a group of psychics, they figured a whole mass of psychics, can you imagine them all lined up? A group of psychics, by concentrating on an incoming missile, could cause that missile to explode not over Washington in the present, but over the North Pole 20 years in the past. I won't say it again. I was right the first time. I didn't get it either. That would have surprised Admiral Peary something terrible, don't you think? And would have caused a paradox which I really can't deal with and don't want to. But my opposition to Uri Geller was what really got me started in this business. Actually, it started when I was 15 years of age, and during a period of 2 hours, well, to tell you the story, I was studying conjuring since the age of 12. I had learned a few magic tricks, the usual things, and I was getting to know a couple of professional magicians, and I wasn't all that bad at it. It was better than playing the bells of St. Mary's on my cufflinks, I can assure you. And by the time I was 15, I thought I knew quite a bit about the trade, and I was invited to go along to a spiritualist church called the Assembly of Inspired Thought. Wow. I went along there for 3 services on 3 subsequent Sundays, 3 consecutive Sundays, and I saw that they were using exactly the same gimmicks that I was learning about in my books and seeing advertised in the catalogs. And I was angry at that because I saw older folks there, particularly with tears coming down their cheeks, believing they were speaking with the voices of the dead and whatnot, and I resented it. At the 3rd meeting, I stood up, and quite angrily, I reached into a large urn that the man had there and took out some scraps of paper and began distributing them in the audience to show the audience there, the congregation he called it, how these tricks were being performed. I denounced them quite angrily at the age of 15, and I really didn't have the authority to do it. I really didn't know much of what I was talking about, but I knew I was right, at least I felt I was. I was promptly arrested and spent 2 hours in jail waiting for my dad to come down and get me out. I was charged with interfering with a religious meeting, and quite justly so. I had done exactly that because it was a registered church and had the protection of those laws. During that 2 hours in jail, though, I think that the psychic world probably suffered more than it ever knew. Because during that 2 hours, the negative vibrations I put out, I made up my mind during that wait in that jail cell that someday I would have the authority and the position and the knowledge, the ability, certainly the platform, from which to assail these people justly and tell the public exactly what they were all about. In my 4 books, and my 5th one coming out shortly, I have managed to outline my campaign, and I'm here tonight to not only demonstrate a few of these things for you, but to try to tell you to beware of people who make these claims. I decided that because, at the age of 15, I've been locked up for doing something that I felt I could justly do. I doubt that I'll be locked up this time, because I got a heck of a lawyer, I'll tell you. Now, my fight against Uri Geller has been perhaps one of the things for which I'm best known, and I heard some falling on the floor earlier. I asked my audiences in advertisements for this lecture if they would be kind of bringing off some spoons along. I'm tired of stealing them from restaurants. I have quite a collection at home. I would like to have at least 5 or 6 spoons from the audience, if I may. Anybody who has them, if you can bring them up to the front now, I'd be happy to take them from you. Let me see. We got 1, 2, 3. Oh, we're doing all right. Okay. Cheap. What can you do? That's that's a nice one. I like that. I may keep that one. Oh, very good. Thank you. Oh, beautiful pattern. Any others here? Oh, there's a doozy. Look at that one. Yes. Now, I think I might do this on camera, if that would be suitable. Let me see. The camera is focused where the water is right now, so perhaps I'll just scoot the water out. I cannot see the screen very well from there. Perhaps you can tell me whether or not... is that pretty good? Can you see that tolerably well? Now, I've got a little bit of wet on here. Just a minute. Neatness counts in all these cases. Now, I again can't quite see what I'm doing here, but some of these are huge, big spoons. Some of them are itty-bitty, tiny ones. Now, these say on them, this one says, for example, stainless something, Cadillac stainless. Well, this one says Walco stainless. This one here says stainless Japan. What can I tell you? All right. Now, I don't see any two that match, but we might get two that are approximately the same shape. Perhaps these, well, I'll bend this one a little bit, if I may, just to get it to try to match the other one. That seems to be not too bad. Now, maybe you can see this to me here on the stage. Could I ask for someone to join me on the stage? How about this little fellow sitting right down the middle here? Let's hop up on here. Yeah, come around this side. Now, what is your name? Whatever. All right. Now, I'm going to try to find the center of the screen will be about there, I guess. A magician's bit. Very handy stuff. Now, what I'm going to do, Andy, is I'm going to ask you to get down here, and if you'll hold this, yeah, I guess you can see it like that, can't you? I'm going to stroke it like this, and I'm going to ask, it's going to move a little bit because I'm stroking it. Now, you're going to get the impression, I'll hold it from this side, perhaps it would be better. You're going to right out for the very, very tip there, as far out as you can, and just very gently, okay? Now, seems to. Let go of it for a second. Look, I'm just going to hold it here and watch. Oh, goodness. How about a big round of applause for Andy? I think you did very well. Thank you. You can take that if you want. Take it down. That's a souvenir for you. What you've just seen is usually called the Uri Geller spoon trick. But by Prometheus Books, I trust you'll all buy several copies of that too. It's an update of the magic of Uri Geller, which manipulations of spoons and watches and keys and things like that was easily solved by the magicians. That wasn't it. Actually, I found out he didn't. It was being done by high school students in Tel Aviv, and he found that it was an interesting trick, and a lot of adults hadn't even seen it, so he went on to tell. It's a simple thing. It's like getting into a number of people can get into a Volkswagen or a phone booth or eating goldfish or whatever. You know, all these in Tel Aviv at the time, I'm told by folks who lived there at the time, and there's one gentleman right here at UCLA, some of the restaurants would have a sign up saying, if you bend or break the cutlery, you pay for it. But one thing I think Geller did invent was the Uri Geller watch trick. No, I won't break it. I won't break it, I swear. There's one volunteer. There's two volunteers. We'll take. What'd you do with your child? You dumped your child? Yeah, he's back there. I saw him there. Oh, good. You still sober? Get back into the camera range here. Now, I don't know whether, can you see on, oh, this is digital. Yeah, well, we'll use that as a reference anyway. It says 745 on it. This one says maybe a little bit. This is a Longines, and it has a small size. 35 years. Well, you should get, I mean, Timexes are not all that expensive. 7:45 or 7:45, and it says on yours 7:46, so you're a minute ahead. I say 7:43. 4 on mine and 7:45 on this one. In fact, it just passed the second. I want you to open up your hand on the back of the watch in the middle there, okay? That's right. Oh, you do so well. Let me see if you're on camera. This says to the watch, change, and the people in the audience are supposed to say, change. I'm not going to ask you to do that. I discovered that it really doesn't make a bit of difference what you say. Finger off it for a moment, and let me see. Not yet. Sorry. Okay, we're going to have to work very hard now. I'm going to move only the little hand on the watch. Now, this is not easily done. Big move. Why am I saying that? I can't do that. That's ridiculous. To make the noises either, but the union likes it. 5. Now, that's about a minute ahead of that. Audience, what time you see on that in case they can't see it?
7:44.
7:45, right on the nose a minute ago, didn't it? So have you ever had this watch repaired? I mean, have you had any trouble with it? It's got to be one or the other.
Yes to your first question, no to your second.
All right. Put your hand out there again. Let's try. Reverse. Now, more. It went back 1 minute. We're going to try for more than that. What time does it now say?
It says 5:30.
How time flies when you're having, say, 5:30. A miracle, a miracle. Burnham, he must be a witch. You get your watch back. Will you take this terrible cheap watch back to that gentleman? I thank you very much. Now, you folks are coming in. I recognize at least two gentlemen who are in the magic trade, and they're sitting there and they're chuckling. They have seen what happens, and it's not too difficult when you know when to watch and how to watch. Particularly, it's not working as well as it should, and that's exactly the moment when you stick the knife in between the ribs. And the thing that Mr. Geller doesn't do, and I imagine he's probably puzzled by it, I wouldn't be surprised. I used to do a newspaper, and I got into the habit of cutting out clippings that I was interested in and sticking them up on the bulletin board in my office, and I thought, oh, that's a marvelous idea for a magical type trick. Now, I'm going to use one of okay. Now, I chose you, sir, because before this audience came in, we wired our chair goes up in flames. So let's all pray that it works, particularly you. Okay, 150, maybe 400 words. This is an article on salaries for UCLA academics. I thought I'd advertise the fact that the staff is underpaid. Right. Now, I use a pair of scissors rather than a pen or something like that because you can slip a pen around. Up and down with this pair of scissors, I want you to say stop anytime at all, okay? As I run up and down. Try not to stop me. And when you say stop, I'm going to stop, but then you have a choice of making me go up a little bit or down a little bit, whatever you want me to cut. And cutting irrevocably commits me to having chosen a certain line, correct? Okay. As I move up and down, anytime at all, this gentleman down here, please. Do you want me to cut there? Down, did you say? More? You're satisfied there. I'll try to cut straight. Whee! There it goes. Sir, would you be kind enough now to leave your seat and come up and pick up that piece of paper so that you're sure that it hasn't been switched for another piece or anything like that? Very good. Now you can take your seat again. We'll see if it bursts into flames. Now, I didn't look. Did I cut through the middle of a line, or is there an intact line at the top there? It's intact. In other words, sometimes I cut right through it and you have to choose the next one. All right. In that top line, I presume you have 3 or 4, maybe 5 words, a few words in a way that you can choose. It isn't a word like discombobulate or something that fills the whole line. Okay. I want you to choose one of those words, and you have a perfectly free choice of what word you'll choose, but I don't want to choose words like and or with or but or she or he. Those are very common ones. Just choose one of the others, and I'm sure it's not a whole line of nothing but conjunctions and articles and that sort of thing. Okay? Have you chosen one, sir? Yes. What is it, please? Political? How many words did you have you could choose from?
4.
There were 4. Okay. And you chose one. Now, first of all, you chose any line, and you chose any word in that line. So your choice has been perfectly free. Sir, I didn't really wire up your chair, but it is a special chair, and you were the only person that I could choose to do this with, because before the performance, I stuck a piece of paper under your chair. Now, before you reach underneath your chairs, folks, there are pieces of paper underneath everybody's chair, just about, but that's a little thing saying this meets the approval of the Los Angeles Fire Department, and a few things like that. Please don't tear that off. You're not supposed to. But if you, sir, will be kind enough, instead of reaching underneath, lift up your whole chair and turn it to face the audience, and you will see there is a piece. It won't? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry. Okay, just lift it up and show the folks, at least in front of you, there is a piece of paper. No, not that. That's it. A whole letter sitting right under there that is scotch taped to the bottom of the chair. Now, would you open it up, please, and in a good loud voice, read to the folks what it says on that piece of paper. Remember, the word was political that the gentleman chose out of a possible 400 words. What does it say?
The chosen word will be political.
How about them apples? Now, in aiming for a solution to this, you will say immediately, of course, the first thing is the suspicion this gentleman is in cahoots with me. He is not in cahoots with me. In fact, I have never met him before or spoken to him. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
All right. And I ask you to take my word for that. You have to take my word for it. You haven't got much other choice unless you want to follow him home and examine his whole past history. But I did specify that the front row not be occupied by any of the staff this evening, and because of that, if they were sitting there, they might be thought to be in cahoots with me. And you did take this chair at your own free will, and you weren't asked to take it or anything like that. Is that correct, sir? Okay. Now, if that is not a solution, then what is the solution? The solution is, folks, that this is the kind of thing of which tricks are made. This is the kind of thing that magicians do for a living. You see, the parapsychologists will look at this sort of thing, and they've only got 2 solutions. Either they have to say, I don't know how it's done, which is true, or they say, the man has got to be a psychic. I'm not a psychic. I can assure you of that, at least not that I know of. But this trick is done by skullduggery, cheating, and lying. But not lying to the extent that this gentleman is in cahoots with me. He has not been in cahoots with me and really never did see me or speak to me before, and his choice was perfectly free. Now, I have shown this kind of thing at various scientific conventions and before groups of parapsychologists and other things very similar to it, as one that I'm going to show you now. Matter of fact, I asked a lady earlier, and I don't know where she's sitting in the audience now, she may have switched around, if she would be kind enough to participate with me using a copy of the Daily Bruin, is it? Is that your campus paper here? Where is that lady? Is she down here? Fine. Good, you can stay where we are if you want. Now, I'm going to tell the story, and if I make any errors, please correct me in a good loud voice, okay? I asked this lady, because she had come in with the early crowd, and I looked about for somebody, and I said, I want someone who is willing to help me in a little experiment that I'm going to do. I said, would you help me? And she said, yes. I asked her to put down her books. I asked her, while I stood down there, with my back turned, I asked her to come down up to the platform here, and she took a copy of the Broom, which had 24 pages, am I correct? 24 pages. I asked her to turn to any page in the newspaper. And she did it with her back turned to me, correct? And I stood down there and talked to some other folks while she did this, and I asked her to merely select one word off any page in the Daily Bruin. Now, I don't know how many words are in an average copy of the Daily Bruin. Many, hundreds of thousands, I'm sure. I asked her to select one word. Then, after she had done that, I asked her to tear the page out neatly. Did you make it neatly? Oh, good for you. I know it took you forever to get it out of there, but she tore it out, and she folded it. Did you fold it or crumple it? You folded it. I asked her to fold it, and I stood well away from her at the time and asked her to put it in her pocket or purse, and you did exactly that. Am I correct? Okay. Have you shown it to anyone? Good, because I said you don't show it to anyone, and she followed my instructions. I'm happy to hear. Did you tell anybody what the word was, or did you tell anything? Nothing about it at all. Did you come here alone this evening, or did you have somebody with you? Alone, okay. What are you doing afterwards? Now, you had a perfectly free choice of any word in that newspaper, and I'm now going to step over to the blackboard, and I'm going to begin scribbling on the blackboard. And you have the paper there, it's still folded up, I presume, in your pocket, and you have not opened it up, and I'm going to start scribbling on the blackboard. I'm going to do some quick guessing, and we'll see how lucky we get. Were there an odd number of letters in the word that you chose? There were. You're not now looking at it, are you? Good, because I saw you look down for a moment. I didn't want anyone beside you to see what it was, if you were to point it out to them. Okay. An odd number, so I will draw a rectangle here, and I will start to divide off to 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, I'll take, now don't say if I'm right or wrong. That's an odd number. Let me see now. I really don't, this doesn't make much sense to me. It's in English, I assume, is it? Doesn't seem to make much sense to me, but wait a minute, something's wrong there. Doesn't seem to make very much sense to me. I'm not sure what we've done here, but it could be misspelled. It's possible. I don't know. Do you have the piece of paper with you? Would you be? Well, do you remember what it was? Okay. Would you tell the audience what it is, please, in a good loud voice? It's what? I'm sorry. About. A-B-O-U. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, this often happens. I've gotten the word upside down. What a pity. Yes, if you turn that upside down, I think you'll find that it does spell A-B-O-U-T. What a pity. That often... I did not know the young lady before she came here. In fact, I don't know if she's student or staff or from off campus. I have no idea. And what we described was exactly what happened. You have that piece of paper there in your pocket, and anyone sitting near you is free to take a look at it and see that it is indeed exactly how I described it. Now, these little experiments are anything but experiments. They are strictly fakery from end to end, but they are magic tricks. They're the kind of thing that magicians make a living with. And I ask you to believe that the psychics are just as clever, because I started this little talk by telling you that I'm a magician, that I ask you to suspend disbelief, that I ask you to watch the demonstration of what I do and get entertainment and enjoyment out of it, but there is a class of the conjurer who refuses to do that. Those are the people who call themselves psychics, and they will take your money and your sanity and your emotional security by telling you that what they're doing is genuine. Now, there's a certain proportion of those people, it's hard to say just how many, who really believe they've got the powers, but they are in the minority. The gypsy fortune tellers, and believe me, there are such things, and they will take vast sums of money from you if you're not careful. The people who write the horoscope and the biorhythms columns for the newspapers. Those that in the National Enquirer will offer to tell your fortunes for $5 and $15 for 10 words or 10 questions or whatever. Incidentally, mentioning the National Enquirer reminds me that I just heard this morning that last week they almost went out of business. Did you hear about it? Terrible. It was close. It was close, folks. One of the reporters allowed a fact to get into one of the articles. They were so highly embarrassed over that, the editor called him in and fired him on the spot. He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I thought it was a lie." And he said, "You can't think in this business. With the Enquirer, we got to know it's untrue before we can print it. This is not the New York Times. We have standards here." So they fired him. Poor man, he has to go and get a real job now. Now, I am going to run through a couple of things that are the best parapsychology has to offer. Now, some parapsychologists will differ with me on that, because they'll say, "Oh, that man's a nudnik. He didn't know what he was doing." But not too long ago, there was a gentleman named George Soule. Well, he died in the 50s, but not too long ago, people were singing his praises. When I gave lectures like this during the question period afterwards, I used to, quite frankly, I'm honest about it, I used to dread somebody out there putting up his hand saying, "What about George Soule?" And I'd have to say, whoops. Well, all I can say is that George Soule was honest. And if the man he was testing, in fact, the several subjects he had, but particularly one man, Basil Shackleton, was honest, if the rest of the researchers were honest, then he certainly did prove the existence of ESP. Now, there was a standard procedure established back in the late 20s and 30s by Dr. Rhine of Duke University, who, incidentally, was the first man to try to put ESP on a scientific basis and subject it to a statistical analysis. Quite a clever thing to do, and quite correct, too. I could only approve of his general intention. The implementation of his intention was a different matter altogether. He used to have, and this is only sort of a mock-up and it's only an approximation of what would happen, sheets made with 100 trials on them. There would be 25 down in a row, and then there would be 4 more rows like this. And this column would be called T for target, and this would be C for call. In other words, this is what the psychic was supposed to get, and this is what the psychic actually did get. Now, in this case, we used numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, although they used the Zener card symbols, which, as you know, are the circle, the square, and the wavy lines and whatnot. These are the Zener cards, and they were used as symbols that were supposed to be a little more dispassionate than numbers, and perhaps they would work better if anything worked at all in this trade. Now, in this case, we see that the number that was chosen, the card that was chosen, if you will, was 2, and the psychic called out 5. He was wrong, so there's no check put in the third column. Down here we have a 5 and a 5 and a 3 and a 3, so that's a hit and a hit. Very good. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 there, and 2 out of 10 is right on the nose. Chances are 1 in 5 of having a success. Dr. Soule followed approximately the same kind of procedure. Dr. Soule didn't have a random number generator back in the early 50s. What he did was he took a book of logarithms, Napier's logarithms. He would open up the book and go put his finger down any place at all, and take the last digit of the logarithm that he was on, and then take the 10th one from that, and the 10th one from that, and the 10th one from that, the last digit in all cases. And that was close enough. It's not the best method, but it's certainly close enough. If the number was greater than 5, he would subtract 5 from it. If it was 0, he would call it 5. And that way he obtained only digits 1 through 5. He would prepare this list of randomized digits like this in his home the night before the experiment, and nobody could see it. The protocol called, of course, for no one but Soule to know what it was, because if anyone else knew, there was a possibility that someone could pass this information on to Shackleton, the apparent psychic. Shackleton would be seated at one side of a laboratory when Soule walked in the next day with this sealed-up piece of paper. Soule would sit down behind a target with only a little slit through which he could look. He would look at the first number and concentrate on it and say, "Ready?" And Sol across the room, with witnesses around him, watching what he said and what he wrote down, would say 5 and write it down. In the next case, he would concentrate on 1 and say, ready, and he would say 2. Again, he was wrong. As we see, he got 2 out of 10 here, which is par for the course. That's what you would expect, although in a much longer run, of course. 1 out of 5 was expectation. But the remarkable thing was that the results that he got in 500,000, 500,000 trials, the results were so much above chance, and it only has to be a small percentage above chance to be a winner, statistically speaking. The chances were, as Carl Sagan would say, billions and billions to 1. Now, those are pretty good odds, folks. Anybody who gets results that are billions to 1 against chance, I'll bet on him. That's why I would have to say, on my lectures when I was asked about Sol, if they were doing it honestly and it was exactly the way it was printed in the scientific journals and whatnot, they proved the existence of telepathy, and that's all I could say. There was no other way of picking holes in the research, except that shortly after Sol's death, a couple of psychologists in England decided they would look into the system a little bit further. So they tested the randomicity of his method of choosing random numbers, and they found it was failing. They found there was something wrong. There were far too few 1s, and the number of 1s that were lacking were made up by an excess of 4s. Now, I ask you to use your imagination. Why do you think that might be? Well, perhaps you'll solve it when I tell you that they also found out that more 4s were winners than should have been by chance alone. Why? Because, suppose he came upon an example like this. Sol is the only one who's ever seen this list of target numbers. No one will ever know how he attained them. He concentrates, says, ready. Shackleton across the room says, 4. And Sol says, right. Simply by correcting the 1 to the 4. That's why there were too few 1s and too many 4s. Well, he was accused posthumously of cheating. He died, you see. They'd do anything to escape me. And that was all well and good, and everyone said, oh, embarrassment, embarrassment, what a terrible thing, my goodness sakes, how can you explain George Sol? And then the Society for Psychical Research decided to save his reputation by examining the 2s, 3s, and 5s and throwing out all the 1s and 4s. And they found, miraculously enough, that even considering only the 2s, 3s, and 5s, which cannot be changed from one into the other, conveniently, without showing marks, obviously, the results were millions, not billions, but millions to 1 against chance. And there the matter rested until just a few years ago, when a lady who admitted that she was very close to Sol and admired him very much, she was also with the Society for Psychical Research in England, who had sponsored this research, decided to look into it and try to save his reputation. And she actually went to the Book of Logarithms and found out where he had chosen his random numbers from. Now, she did that not by examining it until her eyes fell out. She put it into a computer and said to the computer, look at the 20th digit of all logarithms and look for patterns that resemble this. Well, indeed. It so happens that the computer would say, yep, we got it. 2, 1, 4, 3, 3, 4, 5. No, wait a minute. It goes 3, 3, 4, 1, 2. Oh, wait a minute. We missed a couple here. Because every now and then, they'd find that there were a couple of gaps in that series. That is, extra digits had been inserted somehow. They were called EDs. That's what scientists do to make it legitimate, you see. Extra digits, EDs. And every one of the extra digits that was inserted into the random number series was also a winner. Because Sol, it seems, had discovered that instead of writing down all of the digits, all he had to do was leave a few spaces every now and then. And if the next day Shackleton had said 126, he would have written down 126, said, right, you got it. In other words, any number that Shackleton called just had to be entered in both columns and would be considered a win, because no one was allowed to see that list. And no one would know where he put his finger down in the logarithms, and all he had to do was say, I forgot. Because he had done it, apparently he was being trusted. He turned out to be a blatant cheat. Now, how did Dr. Rhine's results go awry? Well, Dr. Rhine would try for direct hits like this, and if it didn't work out too well and only showed that the law of averages was working well, he got a brilliant inspiration. He said, wait a minute. Suppose when I was concentrating on 2, the subject called out 5. Okay. I was concentrating on 1, the subject called out 2. Maybe the subject was one number behind and was doing post-cognition. That is to say, these 2 were hits. These 2 were hits. These 2 were hits. These 2 were hits. You see how good the results can be if we really look for them? And then he said, well, we tried that, and some of these results didn't get anything, either directly across or going one ahead. What about postcognition? Maybe in calling out this number, he was calling it the one I just had before. Let's see if that works. Let me see. Oh, there's a hit. By golly, no other hits down here? Oh, goodness, well, only one there. We won't use that. I guess that wasn't proper. This is what's called data searching. He's going to get results no matter what, friends. And that gave him 3 times as many chances of being successful as he had before. When you got 3 chances out of 5 and you call your expectation only 20% or 1 in 5, there's something awfully wrong. Data searching like this is absolutely forbidden. Well, now, that's some of the best that parapsychology has had to offer. But let's move to what seems to be a very romantic notion, that some people can either bend spoons or move objects, or can cause pictures to appear on, for example, Polaroid film, pictures that don't belong there. Well, a fellow named Jule Eisenbud, MD, who was a Freudian psychiatrist in Denver, Colorado, so there was no hope for him anyway, not because of Denver, but because of the Freudian. He had to find mother in everything, and he did, believe me. He discovered a gentleman named Ted Serios, a bellboy from Chicago, who had a marvelous power. He could hold his hand up in front of a Polaroid camera. You supplied the camera and the film. He'd say, "Go, baby, go." And you'd take a picture. And when you developed the picture, there was a picture of the Taj Mahal or Sophia Loren or whatever. Something that was not in the room. How could he possibly do that? Well, it wasn't too difficult to figure out. Because, do you remember the little telescopes you used to have on your keychain that have a picture of, Dolly Parton or the Virgin Mary, whatever you needed at the moment, you know? Little telescope, you'd hold up to the light like that, little transparency on one end of it, you know? And sometimes naughty pictures, I remember. I had a couple of them. And they were little telescopes, and they came with chewing gum and bubble gum and things like that. Little telescope hung at your keychain. If you have a little gimmick like that, it's no bigger than, say, the filter on a cigarette, or as big as a piece of chalk like that, and you place it in the crotch of your thumb like this, and you hold it up in front of a Polaroid camera and make an exposure, it will register on the film. It'll practically fill the film, the square film. But it won't quite fill it. What it will actually do is it will vignette. That is, there will be dark corners. And all of Ted Serios' pictures had dark corners. Not only that, you'd have to focus the camera to infinity because, very briefly, this is the optical system. If this is the film, this is the camera, this is the lens, focused to infinity. If you have a transparency across the tube, which is grossly exaggerated in size here, and a lens here, any point on that film will come to a focus. First of all, that will give a parallel beam like that. It will come to focus on the film there, and you'll get a whole picture of what's here on the film. And indeed, when we read the description of the experiments, it is true that the camera was focused to infinity at Ted Serios' insistence, because he found out that worked and the other way didn't. So it was a very simple gimmick. But how could he have concealed this little thing in his hand? Well, one thing we were not told when a full-length article appeared in Life magazine, for example, I can't think of the Charlie somebody or other, I can't think of his name, wrote it. No. Well, if you sober up, we'll talk to you later. He had a problem in writing this article for Life magazine because they left something out. They left out the fact that there was a black cylinder of paper that Mr. Serios used to carry in his hand. Now, what could be easier than placing a small thing this size inside of a cylinder of paper? That would conceal it perfectly. And they always handed over the cylinder of paper, however, for examination. A little bit too late. That's locking the door after the horse has been stolen. It was possible to produce pictures like this, but then Dr. Eisenbud came up with this brilliant observation in his book called The Wonderful World of Ted Serios. He said Ted could produce target pictures. That is to say, that's what it would mean to you. It would mean that if you said, I want a picture of a fish, he'd go to the camera and say, click, click, go, baby, go, and there's a picture of a fish. Well, again, parapsychologists speak with forked tongue because that's not quite what happened. He had a test where he said they were doing the test in one afternoon and they had wasted about 200 pieces of Polaroid film to the delight of Mr. Land, no doubt. And finally, they came in with a newspaper and some lunch, and there was a headline in the paper saying, Thresher submarine lost at sea. Remember the Thresher submarine? A nuclear submarine that was lost at sea and no one knew what happened to it. And there was a headline saying the nuclear submarine had gone missing. Thresher missing at sea. So they said to Ted Serios, produce a picture of the submarine where it is now at the bottom of the sea, or wherever it is, Ted. So he stepped to the camera and said, go, baby, go, and produced a picture. And that picture, ladies and gentlemen, says Dr. Eisenbud, was a picture of the Thresher submarine. Now, folks, that check for $10,000 is in that briefcase. It's available to anyone, if they can do what they claim they can do. It's available to Ted Serios. It would now have been paid to Ted Serios if That was a direct statement of fact. But the report is one thing, the description is another. The actual event is certainly different from both. The report as written up in print in the book is a little more colorful than the first description that was given verbally. Because in the book it says that instead of a picture of the Thresher submarine, the picture was actually a picture of Queen Elizabeth II of England in her coronation robes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you may have noticed from my accent, I am a Canadian, and I owe a certain amount of allegiance to Her Majesty. I'm not doing this to defend her, but she has put on weight, it's true, but she does not look like the Thresher submarine in any way. She is not quite that dimension or shape. But, said Dr. Eisenbud, and this is his reasoning, I did not make this up, this is in his book, The Wonderful World of Ted Serios. He wrote out the word Elizabeth Regina. That is the two words, but he forgot to put a space between them because he reasoned Ted Serios, when he infrequently uses a typewriter, forgets to use the space bar from time to time. So, Elizabeth Regina. There are obviously no parapsychologists in the room because you would have noticed that half of the Thresher submarine is already here. Where the two words overlap, we got thra, presumably the front half of the submarine. Thresher. You see, all we need is S-H-E-R now. Now, this is Dr. Eisenbud, not me. Dr. Eisenbud, the Freudian psychiatrist, looked at this and said, well, we got thra, but we didn't bring mother in any place, so we got to get her someplace. Well, let's see what we can do about invoking mother. Queen Elizabeth, wait a minute, she's a mother figure to millions of Britons, isn't she? True. And Britain is surrounded by the sea. Aha. Well, French is another language that Ted Serios doesn't speak, as well as Latin, so we'll try French. How do you say the sea in French? La mer. Where is the Thresher submarine? It's in the sea. See how this all fits together so beautifully? And the sea is the mother of all life. You got it? There's Mom again. I knew we'd get her in again if we could. And for a third try at Mom, let's try this. What is the name of Ted Serios' mother? Why? Because that word, la mer, is very similar to la mère, which is French for mother, and Ted, not speaking French, wouldn't know the difference between the two words. You follow this? The logic is impeccable and cannot be denied by any logical or rational person. Well, it so happens by a strange and somewhat contrived coincidence that the name of Ted Serios' mother is Esther. And since we don't need the E and the T, we've already got them up there. So we have T-H-R, S-H-E-R. Therefore, Queen Elizabeth II of England is in reality the Thresher submarine. Ladies and gentlemen, QED. How can you deny the logic and rationality of that beautiful description? That is Dr. Eisenbud's discovery. Don't applaud me, applaud him. He did very well, I thought, and it's very ingenious. Well, Ted Serios is now no longer taken terribly seriously. I don't think anyone really believes that he is a psychic, but he has recently gotten back in the news, and they're doing new tests with him, and I'm sure that the National Enquirer will be sure to inform us as soon as they possibly can about these wonders. Now, the hour grows late, and I know that some of you bloodthirsty folks came here expecting to see a demonstration of psychic surgery. Well, before I get at all involved in that, I will have to tell you what it is, and I will have to give you a bit of a caveat. I notice there are a couple of young kids in the audience, and I will tell you this. What you're about to see is very graphic. It is graphic enough that occasionally people in the audience will faint. And if, seriously, if you hear anybody near you making little noises like, ooh, this kind of a thing, that's usually what it sounds like. I heard from up here. And they start to slide away in the seat, then be very careful because that person may hit the floor. So just keep your eyes on, never mind the women, they're all right. The men are the ones who faint. They take it more seriously, perhaps. Now, I will tell you what psychic surgery is all about, and I'm going to try to keep it as light as possible, and I'm not going to make exactly jokes about it, but I will keep the proceedings as light as I can because I don't want you to get carried away with the gory mess you're about to see. Psychic surgery is the claimed ability of persons in the Philippines and in Brazil and now in this country, because we're importing them in large numbers from the Philippines, psychic surgeons who come over here claiming that they can actually reach into the human body and produce tumors and other deadly substances and bad blood and whatnot from the body. And they claim that it is a genuine phenomenon, and they claim they can save lives with it. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I have been around for 55 years now, and I am accustomed to flummery of all kinds. I have studied films of the psychic surgeons. I went to the Philippines to see them, and I was turned back from Baguio when I announced my intention. My passport was seized for 48 hours, and I was forced to leave the islands because $24 million on a small estimate, really a conservative estimate, is brought into the Philippine Islands every year by the gullible victims of the psychic surgeons. Now, you've heard that they don't charge for what they do. Indeed, they don't. It's absolutely free. There is only a requirement that you travel over there with Christian Airlines, which has no affiliation with any church that's known, but it's owned by the psychic surgeons, 2 727s that keep on running back and forth. There's always one on its way there, always one on its way back. Boatloads of people, airplanes full of people and everything, disgorge every day at Manila and are taken by bus. Again, only these buses can be used by the patients, and they're owned by the psychic surgeons as well, to the area known as Baguio in the Philippines. The man who was in charge of all this at one time, Tony Agpaoa, is now deceased. He died, the newspaper said, as a result of, quote, rich living, unquote, and I didn't know that would kill you, and I'm going to stop from now on. Tony was the ruler of all of the psychic surgeons. They were all licensed by him, under the table, of course, and they all made a fortune and continue to make a fortune to this day. Again, they don't charge, but you have to use their facilities and you have to stay in their hotel. You also are given at the end of the operation, you and your family are given envelopes with amounts of money like $100 and $200 written on the outside, which is the expected gratuity that is given to them as a tip, so to speak. If this isn't charging, I don't know what is. We're going to go around through this audience with our own envelopes immediately after the lecture. And that will make sure we empty this place in record time, I can assure you. They get rich doing it. That's not so bad. I wish everybody could get rich. That'd be marvelous. But they also take lives at the same time because people go there depending upon that instead of legitimate medical help. Now, I'm understandably angered about that, and I think you should be too. When you know that travel agencies in the United States and Canada actually promote this kind of thing, the Lawson Agency, the P. Lawson Agency up in Canada, has sent hundreds of people over to the Philippines, some of them to their deaths. They say that they have heard from scientists and doctors that it's the real thing. But other scientists and doctors will tell you they've been there and they've seen it and it's not. And I can tell you as an expert conjurer that it is absolute flim-flam from end to end. And my book, Flim Flam, does have a description and illustrations of one method that is used to accomplish this. You may or may not see that method used here tonight. There are many ways of doing it. It is very graphic, and I'm going to do a demonstration. Bear in mind that it is a demonstration. What you're going to see is real blood and guts, but it is a demonstration, and I don't want you to get overly disturbed by it. But while you're watching it, bear in mind that if you were watching this as a lady reporter in one of your Los Angeles smaller papers here a couple of weeks ago was a victim of this sort of thing, she's the last one and the worst worst witness of the whole thing, looking down at her own tummy like this. She saw what you're about to see, and she believed it to be real because she said that it was a first-hand report, something that she witnessed herself. It wasn't something that was reported to her. Well, you're about to see it yourself now, and we're going to enhance it by putting the television camera on it. Again, don't get too disturbed by it. It's going to be graphic. I will need a volunteer. Now, need a volunteer of certain characteristics. It has to be a volunteer. I love a volunteer who's pointing at someone else like that. That's what I really like. I love those people. They're marvelous volunteers. I need someone, that's your roommate. He's not going to be very long. I need someone who is not corpulent exactly, but someone with a reasonable amount of adipose tissue. I don't want someone, tell me, no, you're overdoing it, sir. No, I may have someone, I'd rather use a gentleman because even though I am a doctor, you know, when I touch the ladies, they sometimes object to it. I see a gentleman holding his hand up down there. Let's stand up and let's take a look. Oh, that's fine. I'd love that tummy. Come on up here. Okay, let's give him a round of applause as he comes up in the chair. Okay, I'm going to ask you if you'll be kind enough, please, to just plunk yourself out on the table with your head here and head here. That's your head on that end, yes. Okay, just plunk out here, and I'm going to, just a minute, we can move everything in a little bit closer if you want. Just come in a little closer to this edge, if you would. Now, where is the gentleman who's going to operate the camera for us, please? You must be there someplace. That's fine. Would you roll up your sweater, sir, and pull your shirt out of the confines of your trousers there? I don't want to do it. I don't know you very well. I'm going to just move your legs a wee bit. I'm going to put the water over here where everyone can see it. Now this, yes, let's take the house lights down if we can. Is there someone there can do that for us, please, so that we won't get as much glare on the screen? Now let's concentrate. Pardon me, I'm a bit wet. Oh, you have an INSI. There are insies and outsies, and he's got an INSI, has he ever? Let me tell you. Just keep this hand about there, if you would. Now, excuse me, I get one of these towels. Nothing personal. I'm a doctor. It's okay. Just tucking you in here. I'm glad you didn't wear your best clothes. Oh, these are your best clothes. I'm sorry. Now, you're a student. Okay, well, that's your fault, not mine. Pardon, this was hot water. It started out as hot water. It ended up as a sort of cool. Now, what do we have there? Do we have? Oh, good. We have the area pretty well. That's fine. Can you see that reasonably well on the monitor? Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. Now, let's. Okay, that should be all right. I think that's a pretty good shot. Okay, now, just don't want to get anything. Put your hands behind your head, perhaps like that, so you won't, because I wouldn't want to get any icky on your sweater or anything like that. All right. Now, I want you to watch carefully, because what you're about to see, again, I warn you, it is graphic, and what you're about to see, you must not take too seriously, but think of what would happen if you yourselves were in the Philippines, were watching an operation like this taking place. If you were, this is what you would see. It is a little difficult, isn't it, Ted? Yep. Put that down there to absorb anything that might otherwise stain you in any way. Where's that other towel? Here it is. Ew. Now we've got the incision, and we have to be very careful at this point. Oh, icky. Oh, terrible stuff. Now, I've got to be, I hope I'm not getting this on your trousers. Well, they're jeans. It wouldn't.
That's okay, it's me.
Okay, watch. Now, this may be a little more than you can bear. I don't know, but. I don't think either one of us is going to live through this, and there goes another good pair of trousers. Oh well. Now let's one more grope in here, and that is terrible stuff.
It's disgusting.
It is terrible. I've got it all over here, and we're in a terrible, terrible mess. It's all over the place here. Ooh. Now we have to see if we can heal it once more, and it seems to be back where it started. I'm going to lose all the towel in there. I'm going to try to restore you into a reasonable shape, sir, and this is real human blood, by the way. It's not just stage blood or anything, but it will wash out with a bit of luck. It's got some decoagulant in it, and I think that you'll probably feel much better. That'll be $2,000. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give the man a big round of applause. A very brave man to come up here and help us out. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Pardon the bloody hand. Good. You feel much better now, right? I hate to do my wash-up right in front of you, but this is blood, and it's going to stain my trousers, and boy, my mom's going to be mad again, I tell you. She keeps on saying, I don't know what kind of parties you go to, but there's something else. Really, it must be a lot of fighting going on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I tried to keep it as light as I could. I threw in a couple of laughs, and I'm glad that you reacted to that, but I want you to think very seriously of this. Thousands of people from this country alone, and thousands more from around the world, every week are taking off and running off to the Philippines and to Brazil, where a limited amount of this is done, and they are seeing this kind of a demonstration take place. They're coming back to this country to die, in many cases. The Granada television people in England did a rather marvelous documentary on this a couple of years back, and you might have seen it. They actually climbed aboard a plane of people that were going to the Philippines, and they interviewed them all on the way there. And they were getting comments like, oh, I know I'm going to be cured. It's just wonderful. I've waited years to do this, saved up all my money. We mortgaged the house. We borrowed from the bank and everything. My friends gave me a few $100 extra. We're going to the Philippines, and I'm going to be cured. And what have you got, man? Well, I've got cancer of the pancreas or whatever, but I know. It's all right. No, not to worry. There was one little girl in that plane who was accompanied by a doctor. Her parents had insisted she go, and they hired a doctor to go with her. The poor man was hired to do it, and he went along with her. He didn't believe in it. She had a tumor the size of a grapefruit in the back of her neck. She was in a coma. She went to the Philippines, was operated on, as were all the people, and when they brought samples, they actually managed to get a hold of some of the samples of the blood and whatnot and brought it back. Scotland Yard Forensic Department, the best in the world, bar none, worked on it, and they analyzed it as being pig and chicken blood. They found out that some of the so-called tumors that were extracted were actually the cellulose fillers from cigarette filters, that some of them were bits of bark and grass. In one case, almost an entire tape cassette, the Mylar tape from a cassette, had been removed from one woman's stomach in the form of some bloody mess that came out, and they got a hold of it. It turned out to be a tape recording of local native music in the Philippines when they actually played it, believe it or not, and yet that was supposed to look like a tumor. This kind of thing was done to all of the people on that plane. And then Grenada did something very dramatic. They stopped as the people got into the airport, in Gatwick Airport, and they climbed off the plane. As they came down the ramp, they filmed them, and they would freeze the person in the middle of the ramp, and then appearing across the screen, it would say, died 2 weeks later, cancer of the pancreas. Next person would come down, died 6 weeks later, such and such a problem, whatever. Little girl was carried down by the doctor, died 2 days later from the results of the brain tumor that she had that had filtrated into her brain from the neck. It went on, and only one person today survives from that plane flight, and that person is a man who was going blind. He was a diabetic, and he was operated on. They gouged into his eyes and did terrible things to him, caused him great pain, great agony, great discomfort, and if anything, they only aggravated his condition. He is now blind, as he expected he would be, and he's the only one that's not dead that came back from that trip. Now, that's a dramatic documentary, and it's also an indictment of the people who would take you, and they could take you, don't think they couldn't take you, for your money, for your emotional stability, and in some cases for your life. What you've seen me do here this evening is a few simple magic tricks and some manipulations such as what you just saw here. I want you to take it seriously, because your future may depend on whether or not you take my demonstration seriously. You and I have a choice. We have gone to the moon. Now that's remarkable. I know there's no one in this room who went to the moon. I didn't go to the moon, but our species did. Our species got onto a rocket ship, got squirted up into the air on the end of that Roman candle, circled around the moon, sent down a thing that looked like a tin can or a phone booth on spider legs. It landed. Some of the fellows got out, picked up pieces of the moon in their hands, and put that stuff in their pockets and brought it back to us. And we can go to the Smithsonian today and to many other parts of the world and see pieces of the moon 250,000 miles away. They came back safely, and they're alive and well. Now that is all the miracle I need. That, along with the opening of a morning glory, is all I need to make my universe an exciting one. I don't need the fake surgeons. I don't need the Uri Gellers, the spoon benders, and the silly parapsychologists who do endless experiments and interest our Pentagon in spending millions and millions of dollars to try to find out whether there is such a thing when all of the evidence points to the fact that there isn't. Now, I ask you to make a choice. I ask you to make a choice either to go to the moon and beyond, to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the other planets, and out into the rest of the universe. It's there, it's waiting, it's exciting, and it's on our doorstep, and it's available to us if we want to go there. Or you can make the choice that the psychics and the parapsychologists would have you make, which is to retreat into superstition, to go back into witchcraft, back into medieval times, back, if you will, into the caves from which our ancestors came, and sit in front of an ordinary little fire, throwing rocks and stones at things that go bump in the night. Well, I'm not going back into that cave. I refuse to go back into that cave, and I'll not accept these people who want us to go back that way. I'm going on to the stars, and I ask you to join me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We will have a question and answer period for as long as they'll allow us to keep the place open, and if we can have the lights up again, I will clear my throat for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will ask you to consider your questions that you'd like to ask. I'll try to get as many questions in as I possibly can the time we have. If you have to leave, by all means, go right ahead and do so. It's not being rude at all. It is 8:30, just after 8:30. Those of you who have to leave can do so. Those of you who want to stay behind, please ask some questions from the audience, and when you do so, don't give me anecdotal stories about what happened to Aunt Mame in Maine back in 1911, because I wasn't there. But if you want to ask questions about things that I haven't yet discussed, please do so. Oh.
I have a question, sir. Could you explain how these psychics that are working with the police department, how they're able to be of any benefit to them at all?
Okay. I didn't know we had the microphone set up there. Fine, I'm glad we do. The gentleman was asked about psychics who apparently work for the police department. Well, the most famous of these psychics is Dorothy Allison, who lives in Nutley, New Jersey. I suspect it was named after she moved in, but I'm not sure. Dorothy Allison has an absolutely unblemished record. She's never found one damn thing. She's written a book called A Psychic Story by Dorothy Allison. The psychic story, it turns out, if you read from page to page, and it's in paperback and is in its, I think, third printing now, they've sold a couple of 100,000 copies of it. It's very popular. Read it carefully. I really suggest, seriously, that you buy it. It'll only cost you a couple of dollars. Read it from page to page, and you'll find out by the time you reach the end of the book that she hasn't really made a claim about finding anything. I once challenged her. She would never appear with me on radio or television. She would never answer my challenge for the $10,000. I said, all you have to do, Dorothy, is produce one police officer anywhere in the world who will certify that you have found a murderer or a body for them. Just one. And I will give you the $10,000, no questions asked, bang, just like that. I asked her that on a radio program when she was connected by telephone with me and didn't want to be, but there she was suddenly. And I asked her that question. There was a long pause, and the host of the show said, "Are you still there, Mrs. Allison?" She said, yes, there are so many. I said, well, all I want is one. She said, let me see. We waited and waited, and I said, well? She says, well, there are many. I said, name one. I said, what about Staten Island? Perhaps we could use that, because that was her most famous case. She said, oh, no, they'll lie. They say they did that with police work. Actually, I did it by psychic work, but they lie. They ate me there. I said, oh, well, I won't bother to ask them then. I said, can you give me another one that won't lie? Suddenly there was a click. She had hung up the phone on me. That was it. Now, that doesn't mean that Dorothy Allison doesn't have psychic powers, but she sure as hell hasn't proven them to me. When she went to Atlanta, Georgia, you remember Atlanta, Georgia? Recently, with the anniversary of that terrible series of events down there, the murders of the young black folks that were, finally, at least two of them were assigned to Wayne Williams. He was tried and convicted. She said when she went to Atlanta, and she was asked to go there by the police department because she'd made an appearance on the Donahue Show, and she acquitted herself very well on the Donahue Show because Donahue never asked her one question which is the least bit provocative, and I was not allowed to be in the audience or to appear on the show with her. She dictated who would appear on the show and who wouldn't, and who would be in the audience. She has that kind of power. That's the way the psychics can do this sort of thing. Apparently they have veto power over everything, or they just refuse to appear on the program. Donahue wanted her. His producer wanted her, so she got on under her conditions. She had been seen on the show, and she was called into Atlanta. It turned out that she announced to the television audience and around the world via satellite, the first day that she was there, she said, "I have now given the name of the murderer to the police." Wonderful. Well, then it's all over with, isn't it? She said also that there would be no more murders. Well, there were 2 more murders, and she stayed 3 or 4 more days and got her story all mixed up. They finally threw her out of Atlanta, and she went back home. I found out afterwards by actually going to Atlanta and cornering the correct officials in City Hall because they would not answer my mail or my phone calls. I went to Atlanta at my own expense, cornered them, and asked them. And they told me finally the truth. She had given them 43 different names. None of them were Wayne, and none of them were Williams, and the murderer was Wayne Williams. That is the kind of record that Dorothy Allison has. Now, it is not true. In most cases, the police departments call them in. These people go to the police and force themselves upon the police. And, of course, then the public starts to scream if the police don't listen to what they've got to say. You will see Dorothy Allison and Greta Alexander and Irene Hughes and the other so-called police psychics and Peter Hurkos in television presentations all the time, appearing on television saying they've been called in by the police and I have given the police all the information I can and they're now on their way to solving it. Bang! That's the last you hear of them. You never see the police coming back on television and saying, this is a psychic who helped us solve the case. Never. I have 300 videotapes at home. 1-hour reels, 3/4-inch videotape. And lots of those episodes are of people like Allison and Hughes and Alexander giving their spiels on television. But never do you see a police official saying, yes, she actually did what she said she did. Now, that is the plain, simple matter, the fact of the matter. And if any of the police psychics want to collect my $10,000 check, it's right in there. All they have to do is provide evidence that they did something that couldn't be done by ordinary police work, and they immediately collect that. I'm waiting for them to come and take it. Other questions?
Over here on your left. I know you've never, over against the wall. I know you've never given away the 10,000 yet, but have you ever come up against a hoax that was so clever or subtle that you almost fell for it?
Oh, I've come close, but not close enough to count. There was one thing that was not for the $10,000 prize, which I might relate to you as a matter of interest. It really had me puzzled. You may have seen it in Time magazine. It was in the New York Times and Discover magazine. They wrote up rather extensively. It was even on That's Incredible, pardon me. And they almost told the truth about it this time. They almost represented it as it actually happened. They must have been in error somewhere along the line. After all, we are a television audience. That is, we are television-educated people, aren't we? You're led to believe, and I'm sure everyone here doesn't doubt, that relief is spelled R-O-L-A-I-D-S. And that Fran Tarkington and Kathy Lee Crosby and John Davidson are all intellectual giants. There's no question of that in my mind. It's been proven to me on television. I saw it with my very own eyes on my own set. Well, this gentleman was a doctor, very interesting gentleman, in Abington, Pennsylvania, and he made a claim in the New York Times, and they sort of doubted it, but they did test it and seemed to be all right, that by taking in an ordinary stereo LP recording, covering the label over, he could look at it with his naked eye and could tell you the name of the composer and the music that was recorded on it. Now, they called me from the New York Times and they said, what do you think, Mr. Handy? And I said, well, I'll give you 2 estimates. I know nothing about except what you told me. 2 estimates. I will say, first of all, the probability and the possibility. The possibility is very close to 0. The probability is very close to 0. The possibility is about 15%, perhaps, because the information is there. If a laser beam or a needle or a magnetic head or something can read the information, well, maybe he's got some way of doing it too. I don't know, but I'd have to know more about it. Then I talked to the man himself, and he said, well, I only do Beethoven to the present, fully orchestrated, classical records only, no avant-garde composers. And I thought, well, that narrows the field considerably, but still there's an awful lot. There's everything from Vaughan Williams through Pachelbel and the whole thing, everything. Well, Pachelbel, Beethoven to the present, I don't know about that. But I decided to test them. So I took 10 recordings out to him, covered the labels, and I thought at the last moment, hey, what about the matrix numbers, the little numbers in between the last groove and the label? The matrix number tells what the recording is. It's just a number, but you can look it up in the catalog, so I covered them very carefully too. Sure enough, the guy got 10 out of 10, which is pretty good. Then I tested him with 20 recordings many weeks later when I was convinced he was the real thing, and he got 20 out of 20. Now, them's pretty good apples, friends. And the way he was doing it was very interesting. I'll give you one thing that really blew my mind, though. He looked at one, he said, oh, let me see. That's Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Very good. Made before 1948, obviously. Put it aside. I said, well, maybe, I don't know, because it was a double-blind test. I didn't know what it was until I looked afterwards at the master list. It had been made up for me, you see, because if I suspected what it was, I could give him feedback unconsciously. I didn't want to do that. Looked at the next one, he said, oh, you're trying to fund me. I said, what do you mean? He says, this is another Rite of Spring, still by Stravinsky. He said, but this is a digital recording, by a German orchestra. Now, come on. What's different about the way the Germans play music? Is it boom, boom, boom? Is it all like this? I don't know. I couldn't tell. He's the expert, and I thought, well, maybe you're right. By golly, he was right. It was a Deutsche Grammophon recording, and it was a German orchestra. He was right all the way through. Another one he looked at, and he said, this is garbage. He said, this isn't classical, that's for sure. He said, it's just gibberish, just gibberish. Turned out to be one of, oh, God, I can't say this, so I guess I better, now that I started on it. I just got a message in my pocket from Alice Cooper here. He wants me to call him while I'm in town. And I did work with him a couple of years ago. I chopped his head off every night, and it never worked. He lived through every one of them. And it was a recording of Alice Cooper that the guy was looking at. And so obviously he's a critic of music, too. He said it was garbage and gibberish. I've never told Alice that. I better not. Anyway, another one he looked at and said, this is all speech or song. He says, probably, since there's no pattern to it, it's probably just a spoken word. It was a recording called So You Want to Be a Magician. Now, the way the fellow was doing the thing was examining the structure of the recording. And if you look at Beethoven's Sixth, for example, you will find, and I did find, he says, look, it starts out very softly and with very low amplitude and everything like that, and then it gets a heavier amplitude, ta 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 dum dum bum 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 bum, and you can see it. If you look at it with the naked eye, you can see it. Now, you can't read every note, but he looked at it, saw that characteristic, thought it was a sixth. But how did he know it was a German orchestra? Because he looked at the recording, saw that it had a turned-up lip on the edge, knew it was a Polydor recording. Pardon me, not Polydor, Deutsche Grammophon, I'm sorry. Another one is Polydor. Deutsche Grammophon. And he knew that it was digital because it was absolutely clean and smooth in between grooves. No scratch, no hissing, no nothing. He could tell that by looking at it. And he knew that Deutsche Grammophon had only recorded in digital, up till that point, German orchestras. So he knew it had to be he didn't know which one. It could be any German orchestra. It might have been a Umfa band out of Heidelberg. He didn't know, but it was going to be German no matter what. So the guy was absolutely correct. The guy is marvelous. It's a great party piece. I said it's of no use to anybody, but you don't have to take off your clothes and run around naked at the next party to entertain, So he said yes, and I said, well, on the other hand, maybe all the glue in the world will go bad and you'll make a fortune putting labels back on recordings. I don't know, but other than that, that's not of any use whatsoever. But it just shows you that some people will have some particular talent in some direction like this that will floor somebody like me. You can imagine my astonishment when I looked. I didn't know as he was calling out the 10 recordings. When I looked at the list and boom, 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 all the way down the list, absolutely correct. Except for a Mozart, which he said was a Schubert, but that was pre-Beethoven, and he didn't say he could get those because all the patterns of symphonies, the amplitudes and the modalities and everything, and the length of the movements were exactly the same. The one before 1948 that he knew was recorded before 1948 was because it wasn't variable pitch. All the grooves were exactly the same distance apart, and Columbia introduced variable pitch apparently in that year, so he knew it was made before then. It's very complicated, but the guy knows what he's doing, and I congratulate him. My hat is off to him, no question of it. But he didn't say it was supernatural, so he didn't get the money. He had a perfectly ordinary explanation for it, and I congratulate the guy. I've come upon several things that have astonished me. I mean, really sort of blown my mind, but people do have peculiar abilities to do certain things. They have not turned out to be paranormal or supernatural. I think that a guy who plays the violin is supernatural. Because I could play the violin too, but you wouldn't want to listen, believe me. Other questions? Where are we?
Yeah. I'd like your comment on telepathy during dreams. I'm thinking of a study which was published about 15 years ago in particular, and I can't say I remember the details exactly.
That might have been at Maimonides Hospital by Professor Ullman, do you think? Does that
Precisely,
sound familiar?
that's it.
Well, there were some dream telepathy experiments done at Maimonides way back when, and frankly, I don't know a great deal about them because they were done under grants from, I believe, the New York Department of Mental Hygiene or some such thing. They were done at Maimonides Hospital and in the labs of the New York Department of Mental Hygiene by a man named Charles Honorton, a very respected parapsychologist, and Montague Ullman. But Montague Ullman I do not consider to be a very let's say, competent witness of these things. For one reason is that he described an episode where Uri Geller apparently bent a key, which he himself held in his hand. I spoke to someone else who was present at the time, and it didn't quite happen that way, and I won't get into all the details, but Ullman believes it did. Not for that reason do I doubt the dream telepathy things, but that is a very complex thing. I'd really have to go into all the details and examine the documentation on the thing with you and everything. It's not easily discussed, unfortunately. If you'd like to talk to me afterwards about it, I'd be happy to discuss it with you. It's not something that would be of general interest, but I will talk to you afterwards if you'd like to approach it. Yes, if you've got a question, let's get to the microphone. Is there someone on this side first?
Yeah, I'd like to know if you believe in God.
No, I don't have any particular reason to. I don't have any evidence for a deity, a creator, if you will. That just happens to be my personal opinion, but frankly, the committee and myself don't examine religious claims because they don't usually claim scientific proof, the kind of proof that you can examine and put on a microscope slide or that sort of thing, with the exception of things like, miracles. For example, the Shroud of Turin, and certain miracles where Madonnas in churches, usually made of plaster, weep and whatnot. That we can look into and have on occasion. And we've found the evidence somewhat wanting, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I don't deny the existence of God. There's a the atheist is supposed to be someone who denies the existence of God. Another dictionary will tell you someone who doesn't have evidence that God exists. I adopt that latter attitude because I can't prove Santa Claus doesn't exist, though I very seriously doubt the existence of Santa Claus. Proving a negative is an almost impossible thing philosophically and logically. But the answer to your question is no, I may miss it, but then I'll find out, won't I? And I'm willing to find out.
A few days ago, I saw a new show by Nova called The Case for ESP,
Yes.
or of ESP, and it had remote viewing and the Schmidt telekinesis. Could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, that was an unfortunate thing on the part of Nova. I know they're going to regret it. They've already regretted it in England when it came out under the banner of Horizon. I got a transcript of it, but I have not seen the tape since it was broadcast on Tuesday night when I was here lecturing at UCLA. But I will be preparing a report on it, and several other members of our committee will be, for the Skeptical Inquirer, which incidentally is subscribable to if you want to ask me details about that afterwards. That's the journal of our committee that Professor Krupp mentioned. Now, I will give you a quick insight into the remote viewing experiments that were described on there with Pat Price and other people. Targ and Puthoff, two scientists, laser physicists, so they know everything about conjuring, at Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California, conducted some tests on this remote viewing mode. Now, what they did, and I won't go into all the details on it, but they would choose 100 locations within 30 minutes driving time of ground zero. They would then, from that target pool, one of them would choose one envelope without knowing which one it was, go to the car, open it up, and then upon seeing the instructions, drive to that location. Suppose it was a bowling alley or something like that. Well, he would absorb the sound of the bowling balls and the people and the Coca-Cola machine or whatever, and the sight, the lights, and all that kind of thing, the smell of the tobacco smoke and whatnot. That would be done at a certain time arranged in advance. Back at home base, the psychic would be sitting there with a tape recorder, cassette recorder, reading his or her impression into it and making sketches if he or she thought that it was necessary. That way we would get 9 transcripts and 9 locations. Then they would take the list of locations and the 9 transcripts shuffled up and give them to judges. The judges would then rank them according to best fit. And there's a statistical picture that you can apply to this very easily, and it's a very concise and very precise one. And the results they got were millions to one against chance. Well, the flaw turned out to be that if you examine the transcripts carefully, you found out that there were hints in there, very obvious hints. Such things as, well, 6 down and 3 to go. You know very well that you're just starting in on number 7. And since the list of locations, of targets, was given in chronological order to the judges, and they knew it, all they had to do was assign that to number 7. Then other hints like, well, when we were at the marina yesterday, the marina being one of the targets, so all you had to do was look where the marina was and make this one follow the marina. The clues were so very evidential, and this was not discussed in the NOVA program, because they took it from the scientific books, not from the people like me who don't have any academic degrees, who have expressed a skeptical attitude about this thing, because they go only to scientists, you see. They know everything, right? Of course, as we all know. And I don't have a PhD, so how could I even tie my shoes or figure my income tax? But they don't listen to folks like us. They'll listen to Targ and Puthoff. And Drs. Cameron and Marks in New Zealand did an interesting experiment. I think it's a very elegant experiment. They took the list of transcripts as given to the judges, gave it to a class of 40 students, and said, rank them in order. The class was 100% successful in doing that from the clues that were in them. They then took the clues out and gave the second set of transcripts to another class of 40 kids. They got just chance results in trying to assign them to their targets. Then we contacted Drs. Targ and Puthoff, and they told us in so many words that the clues had been removed from the transcripts. Then before they were given to the judges. But the fly in that ointment was that the transcripts that Cameron and Marks had been obtained from one of the judges, a man named Arthur Hastings, Dr. Arthur Hastings, who had even left his remarks in the margins of these typed transcripts. So the claim that the clues were removed from the transcripts was a false claim. I call it a lie. They call it a defect in the evidence. So that is the kind of thing that is being used to prove remote viewing. And that's what was described on the NOVA show. That's one thing that was described in the NOVA show. Again, I have not seen the whole show, so I can't give you the whole tirade, but I could if I had seen the show. Is there someone at the other microphone that we can alternate with? Yes.
Yes. Have you ever examined acupuncture claims?
Acupuncture claims. Personally, no. I'm scared of needles. But acupuncture makes many different claims. The most common claim is the analgesic or anesthetic effect of the acupuncture needles. Well, I know that in Johns Hopkins years ago, a couple of years back, I am trying to trace these experiments, and I'm having one heck of a time. If there's anybody here in the medical field, and I'm going out to Loma Linda, to the university there on this coming Tuesday, and Dr. Bill Jarvis has promised me that he has a source for this. They tell me that they did a group of 40 patients, 20 of whom received genuine acupuncture. The other 20 of the 40 received genuine acupuncture. The other 20 received pseudo-acupuncture. Their skin was just pinched on their back and whatnot, and they believed they were receiving it. Between the two groups, there was no significant difference in the analgesic effects, the anesthetic effect of the needles. Now, you have the other claims, of course, that it relieves diseases of various kinds. The theory of acupuncture is all wrong. It says that it is puncturing various vessels in the body that conduct air from place to place in the body. Now, that's what the ancient Chinese thought. When they examined cadavers and found empty tubes, which were veins and arteries, going through the bodies, they thought that there was air passing through these, not blood. They had not discovered the circulation of the blood, and they thought they were letting bad air or evil vapors out of these empty tubes by inserting the acupuncture needles. So the theory of the thing is wrong. Whether it works or not, I'm not interested in theory. I'm interested in whether it works or not. I can show you by theoretical demonstrations that astrology can't work, but that's not the question I asked. The question I ask is, does it work? And the answer, when you do good research on the thing, is, I believe, no. Yes, sir.
Have you examined claims of Kirlian photography, and could you elaborate on it?
Yeah, Kirlian photography was discovered by a man named Kirlian, strangely enough. Talk about synchronicity. And Thelma Moss, a graduate of UCLA, was the lady who gave it most publicity. I have been looking through UCLA to try to discover the two technicians who took these photographs for her. Briefly, I won't go into all the details of it, but one places a couple of conductors with whatever between a human hand or a leaf or a 50-cent piece or whatever, passes high voltage, with a piece of film in between as well, high voltage, high frequency electricity through it, and obtains, when the film or sensitized paper is developed, a corona effect, whereby you see the object outlined in sort of a halo. Now, this was thought at one time to be illustrating the human aura, except they found out that a lychee nut would do the same thing, and so would a leaf, and so would a 50-cent piece, and so would a golf ball. Anything has an aura around it, because this is actually registering the passage of high-frequency, high-voltage electricity through the film, and is not necessarily registering even the corona effect, which is a glow, a high-voltage discharge around the object. Now, they have made all kinds of claims, and in the front page of the introduction to Flim Flam, you will see a Kirlian photograph that I made at a psychic fair. They had me in there. They didn't know it was me, of course. It's funny how I have to go to disguise in these things, or they come at me with scythes and torches for some reason. And I put my hand in this black bag, and they had a Polaroid plate there, and they made a discharge through my 3 fingers, which I quickly moved down for 4 more settings, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll see it reproduced, and as I say, in Flim Flam, the first illustration there. And what I did on the first one is touch Lysine, the second one I touched hard, then I touched medium, and then I touched medium and put my leg up against the metal card table as well to produce a different grounding effect, and got 4 distinctly different coronas in a matter of a few seconds. This is supposed to show my mental state, or my emotional or physical state as well, and I could change it that rapidly merely by moving my fingers down in 4 bursts like that and putting my leg up against the side of the table. I rather doubt that it's really showing what it claims it can show, though for all I know it may. All I can say is that the evidence seems to show that it doesn't. The one thing that Thelma Moss did, however, which has stood as an example of miracles in this field, is what's called the phantom leaf effect. I believe that Thelma was rather misconstruing the evidence she saw, because as a kid I did a lot of experiments with Tesla coils and high-frequency coils and Ford coils and whatnot, and that's why I haven't got a full head of hair today, folks. I used to until I was 15, and it all fell out during high-voltage experiments, and I'm only kidding you. Not much, but I am. Thelma used 2 sheets of glass, a piece of leaf in between it, conductors on both sides, film, and she got an outline of the leaf, as would be understood. She then tore a piece of the leaf out and did the whole thing all over again. And where the leaf had been torn away, you saw a thin, ghostly effect of the part that had been torn away, like a phantom limb effect. Well, I think the reason that she got this was if she had investigated further and taken the leaf out altogether and washed the plates and put a piece of film in there with no leaf, she still would have registered the leaf, because what happens is that high voltage, high frequency electricity actually punches holes through the dielectric, and that piece of glass will always register, it's printed on there like a photographic negative, will always register the entire leaf, though faintly. So using the same pieces of glass plate and leaving the leaf in exactly the same position produced, I believe, the effect of the phantom leaf. And I have demonstrated since by experimentation that that is indeed the effect. Whether that's what happened when she did it, of course I wasn't there, so I can't say whether it was, but I'm trying to get hold of at least one of the 2 technicians who did these experiments. They're someplace in UCLA, and they're avoiding me, folks, and I wish I knew who they were. So much for Kirlian photography. Yes, sir?
Yeah. Have you looked into the claims made for Edgar Cayce?
Oh, yeah. Cayce's described in my book under he's known as the sleeping prophet. The chapter in my book calls him the slipping prophet. You no longer see his books on prophecy, simply because most of the prophecies are supposed to have taken place by now. New York under the water, and Iowa half under the water. Los Angeles went long ago. All of California went. And those prophecies, since they didn't take place, those books are no longer published or of any interest to anybody. But his books on absolute healing are still published. I really will refer you to the chapter in the book. You'll see such things as him prescribing cures, which are incidentally found in a book called Hopkins' Bedside Book of Medical Help. It's a self-help book in medicine. So his wine of ipecac and all that sort of thing, and the strange roots and things that he gave to people, those recipes are in such books published in the late 1800s and early 1900s, bedside books for medical encyclopedias for home care. Some of the cures that he prescribed were given for people that had been dead for several months. And my doctor told me that even if you gave them these powerful laxatives, it wouldn't work. It couldn't, like they say, it wouldn't work, but it couldn't hurt, after all. So Edgar Cayce is perhaps one of the most easily disposed of all the psychics. He simply fell on his nose every time he turned around. The books that were written about him, by the way, written by Hugh Lynn Cayce, that was his son. And Hugh Lynn Cayce, who recently died, I understand, had no other way of making a living. That was it. And if he didn't write a book about his father, he starved. Naturally, the books were rather complimentary. And if I wrote a book about my father, I think it would be complimentary too, even though I'd have to strain hard to do that. Yes?
I want to know if your offer for $10,000 is still open.
Oh, yes, it always will be. As a matter of fact, it's in my will, and my estate, my executors are told that after my death it will continue, and they are to appoint a panel of 6 people to administer it. So you don't get rid of me that easily.
Okay.
Would you like to try to claim it?
Yes, I'd like to ask you if you would accept a claim for the prediction of Skylab documented in a Perth, Australian newspaper the day
Prediction of
before it
what?
landed.
That it would fall?
In Perth, yeah, near Perth. I have the letter. I was the
yes.
person.
Well, what we have to do is we have to take into account how many of those predictions were made. There were several hundred of them made. Some of them were
It was
mailed to
written
me.
in my diary 6 months in advance.
Okay, but remember this.
And I called them a week before, and I have the letter from the
Okay,
editor
I
here.
believe you.
Okay.
I don't doubt you at all. I believe you, 100%. Okay? You
Okay,
accept
so
that?
if
Okay.
it's true,
One second. One second.
All right.
I can also, I've never bet on a
I
horse
could
in
use
my
the
life.
money.
Okay?
Huh?
But I can tell you this, I have bet on a roulette wheel. You know that I never lost? Never lost betting on a roulette wheel? When I was in Ecuador, I was stuck with a few sucres, and we were leaving the hotel, and they had a wheel in there, and I went down, and I put 4 sucres on the red, and it spun around, came up red. I picked up the money and never put money on a roulette wheel again. I won that once, so I've got a 100% record of never losing at a roulette wheel. Never, folks, never. Any time that I bet on a roulette wheel, I've won. Now, making one prediction like, how many other predictions have you made?
That's the first one that was significant. However, this came from a dream, and I've had other dreams come true. I had the.
How many other predictions have you made, though?
I've been a practicing psychic for 4 years, and
How many predictions have you made?
I don't make a lot of public predictions because I don't have a lot of dreams about
How many
things
predictions
like
have
that.
you made?
I don't think that's relevant.
I think it's very relevant. I just pointed out that
I
I've
do
never
readings
lost at a
on
roulette wheel.
people. In general, I do readings on people and talk to them about their emotional state and things in their life.
Okay, but that's
And
not what
those
we're
are-
talking about, is it? We're talking
Pardon?
about predictions, right? Okay,
If
I go
people
back
ask
to...
for specific predictions, I will ask the source, which is God, for an answer, and He will tell me what
Oh, you
to
speak
say.
to God directly?
He speaks to me.
Oh, I see. Well, he hasn't spoken to me lately, so he didn't notify you of your name. I didn't know you were
My
here
name
tonight.
is Linda Schiller.
I'm glad to hear
And
it.
why speak to
Is that
Him when I
right?
pray?
Right, okay.
And He speaks to me in thought and in dreams.
Okay.
As
If
He
you
does
wish
to
to
anyone
believe
here
that,
who meditates.
Fine, you're welcome to have that belief. But I must point out to you that I have to take all of the predictions that you've made and consider them for their
I
on
offer
target.
you a reading tonight after this, and if you're not satisfied with it,
Well,
you can
that's
throw
not
away
the
the-
way a
you can keep
scientific
your
test
check.
is done, love. It's not done that way by doing
I
a reading
work
for me.
with people,
I know you do, yes. I understand
and
that.
I can
You made
read
that very clear.
people. I can't
Okay.
read bricks.
Okay, no, I didn't
I'm
ask
not
you
claiming
to
to
read
read bricks, but I can read
If
human
you did,
feelings.
that would be interesting. But
No.
that's not
And
the
I-
way a
and
test is
in
done.
dreams, I've been given
Okay,
information,
well,
and
we
you
got to
can
stick
read
with
this
one
letter.
thing at a time. Now, one thing at a time. Let's not.
Would you like to hear the letter?
No, thanks. I believe that the letter really
Does
does.
anybody
do what
else
you
want to hear
said
the
it does.
letter?
No, we believe it. Do we all believe that that letter says what she says it says? Let's hear it. We all believe it. Okay, fine. Now, in order to assess a prediction of this kind, we have to know all of the other predictions that you have ever made, add them together, and find out what the percentage is of success.
3 days before Mount St. Helens went off,
Okay,
I had a dream
Now's
that
not
there
the
would be
time
a...
to really hear the whole story of your life.
Because you don't want to know.
No.
Because
wait.
I'm
Let
making a
me
legitimate
finish.
claim.
Let me finish, please. I will listen to you as long as you want to talk. If you want to talk till 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will be available immediately afterwards when I
Right.
suppose some other people might want the book autographed or something
I
like
know.
that. I will
You're
never
here to make a
cut
lot of
anybody
money.
off from discussion with me, but I will not impose upon these good
I
people
know.
to hear the whole story
We
of
don't
your
want to
life and
know
of mine.
the other side, right? Thank you a lot.
No.
And thanks to everybody for being so open-minded.
Are you
It's
going to
great.
see me afterwards or not?
I would love to.
Okay. Will you? Never mind, you would love to. I don't know. I don't want to know
I
about
will
your
wait
affection.
until 11. That's the last bus to Pacific Palisades.
Oh, I don't have my watch on. What time is it, please? 9. We got 2 hours. Good. We got 2 hours. Fine. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a question. I realize that a lot of your work is
I
with
can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I realize that a lot of your work is with people who are making claims to be psychic.
Yes.
And it's wonderful that you're exposing a lot of them because it's been quite a sore spot for a long time. But what is your explanation for all of the countless personal
Spontaneous events?
things that happen to people, their dreams that something is going to happen to a relative, and indeed it does, and they're sincere people who have no claim to make or anything.
Well, one of the problems in evaluating something like that, sir, is you have to know all of the dreams that any one of these people has had. You have to know how significant they might have been if they'd been successful, and you have to give them a value. This is not an easily done thing. If something does coincide with a dream, if the event later coincides with the dream, you tend to remember it because that's what psychologists would call reinforcement. You get a positive reinforcement thing because it coincides. How many dreams do you think you've had in your life? 10 or 15, 20,000 maybe? In your whole life, ever since you were a tiny child? Then how many of them actually came true? If one of them comes true, it seems like an astonishing thing, and you say to yourself, wow, that must have been a prophetic dream. Now, I remember Mrs. Rudin, my landlady, who one morning grabbed me as I came down the stairs in New York when I was living on 9th Avenue in this 5-floor walk-up, and she said, don't you believe in prophetic dreams now? She said, I had a dream last night as I went to bed around 8 o'clock, and I woke up about 9 o'clock very frightened because I dreamt of a fire. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, the fire occurred just down the street. You heard the sirens yourself, and you saw the fire engines. I said, that's right, Mrs. Rudin. How often do you dream about fires? She said, oh, you know me, almost every... And she suddenly reconsidered because she was badly scarred all up and down her left arm and across her chest. I was told that she had very bad scars. When she was 9 years old, she was caught in a fire, and she was totally obsessed with fires, always asked me, well, you don't smoke, right? Okay, you didn't leave the oven on, did you? Good. You didn't light anything, any incense or candles or anything? No, good. Everything's out in the apartment, fine. She was always worried about fires. It didn't occur to her until I mentioned to her that she had always been after me about fires and about prophetic dreams about fires. You can't count the one time that it happens to coincide. Think of the number of times you've thought of somebody and the phone did not ring. Then think of the very few times when you thought of them and the phone rang and it was them. Now, you aren't able to remember the thousands of times that you would think or someone's name or a memory of that person or some event connected to them would just flash through your mind, because there's nothing to reinforce it later on. It goes through your mind, it passes off your mind screen, and it's not thought of again. But when you get the reinforcement, that tends to make it much stronger. These things are difficult to evaluate. You're talking about the spontaneous occurrence. They are difficult to evaluate. The only thing we can really evaluate properly is the kind of thing that we can bring into the laboratory. Such things as the prediction that the lady outlined there. I will have to know all of the predictions that she made, how they were worded, and whether or not they came true, add them all together and find out what their batting average is. You can't just take one winner out of the whole bunch and say, that's the one I want to base my claim on, if there have been dozens and dozens of others. So that's the way you have to evaluate these things. We had something else over here.
Yeah, could you please tell how you did the spoon trick?
How I did the spoon trick. Everybody want to know how the spoon trick's done? It's done rather well, I thought. I must apologize to you for not being able to tell you how it's done, and there are three good reasons for it. The first reason is the least of the reasons, that other professional magicians make their living doing this kind of thing. They may not necessarily do the spoon trick, but it would reveal to you some of the psychology and some of the skullduggery behind this sort of thing, and I don't think it's fair to the other professionals. But that's the least of the reasons. The other two, I think, are more important. The second one is that if I were to show you how I did that particular one on this particular occasion at this time, you might very easily assume that that's the way the spoon trick is done. But there are 15 to 20 different ways of doing the spoon trick, and when you then see somebody show up on television and they do the spoon trick in a different way, you say, ha-ha, that must be the real thing because he showed us how it was done by fake means. The third thing I think is even more important, though. If I do not let you leave here with some mystery, 20/20 hindsight would dictate to you, gee, that would have occurred to me eventually anyway. That wasn't so smart after all. But if you leave here with a mystery, you will know what I came here to show you, that you too can be fooled. And you can be fooled completely and not have any possibility of a solution. If you learn that lesson, you have learned something that perhaps for the rest of your life you'll remember the next time somebody tries to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge or the gold brick or whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, I've kept you till very late now, and again, I keep looking at my empty wrist here. I don't have my watch, but it is late. I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I bid you good night.